Welcome to our study on the book of Romans. This is the Romans Education, and this is session 31. So far, in the education that we're receiving as sons, there is a pattern that I established with you some time back. I just want us to be able to see it, because as we go forward, I want us to carry this thinking with us. And so in Romans 12:3, we encountered the godly thinking that we were supposed to have. You can see it says, "For I say through the grace given unto me to every man that is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, according as God dealt to every man the measure of faith." And that sober thinking was thinking that was not in line with this world. And so the way the world thinks and the way the world views things is not the way we're supposed to view things, the way we're supposed to think about it. But our thinking is supposed to be in accordance with the doctrine that is being presented to us. And that tells us how to think about those things. And then after we got that thinking, then we moved into the next section of this in verses 4 and 5. "For as we have many members in one body, and all members have not the same office," and we'll be talking about those offices today, "so we, being many, are one body in Christ, and every one members one of another." And in this, we got the godly living aspect, where we put those four body attributes at work among the members of this assembly. And that gets done this way, by looking at the members of the assembly and understanding what the needs are there, and then just moving to meet those needs. And there's going to be a subtle difference between the godly living and the godly labor. So let me just put these three components up here, because this is the way the doctrine always gets presented to us in this order. And that godly thinking, we covered that. That kind of gets your mind moving in the right direction. The godly living now is where we take those four body attributes of participate, cooperate, serve, and respond. Those are the four things that we're now not just thinking about, but now supposed to integrate into our living with each other. And when this body comes together, we ought to be able to look at these kinds of things. Now, let me just give you an example. Thanks, Linda. This already gets done in some ways. This is already happening. Let me just give you a couple of examples. There's been a few times when I've been up here and I've gotten one of those coughing spells, and invariably someone will either get me a cup of water. Barbara has brought cough drops up. Dr. Pepper, preferably. You know, but what I'm saying is that even and what happened is you just very simply saw something happening and said, "Hey, I just need to move to do that." There's some other things that happen as well. Usually, Milt and Barbara are about the first ones here every time, and Milt takes it upon himself to make coffee. Now, if you're a coffee drinker, you appreciate that. I appreciate it. I don't drink the coffee, but I appreciate the fact that I don't have to do it. And so I'm really glad. By the way, Milt's not with us today. He's not feeling up to this, but and if he needed her there, I know Barbara would be there. Really grateful for Barbara being here. Be real easy for her not to have been. And she not only came, but she did the things that Milt normally does. And so I'm just giving you examples, and please, you know what the danger of this is? Now somebody's thinking about, what about when I did this? Okay, look, I don't want to get into that, because now you're just headed for a crash. But I'm just trying to say, these are the kinds of things that get done now. They do. And so we already have that kind of working. But I want to do two things with this. Number one, I want us to be aware that this godly living aspect, and I'm going to kind of separate this here. This godly living aspect is when we are looking at things that need to be done, and we're doing them. But today, you're going to learn another aspect of when I do those things, there's going to be something now in your thinking about that that's actually now going to apply that to an office. And you'll see what that is, because we'll go through those offices today. And so there are lots of ways to put the body attributes into service. But then there's a particular way in which we will take those same things and we'll labor with our Father. And so we'll talk about those things too as we go through. So now that we've seen the pattern, and this is that pattern of godly thinking, godly living, and then godly labor, and as we get ourselves over there to verses 6 through 8, and we understand that when this was first written, the spiritual gifts were in operation at the beginning of the dispensation of grace. And here's, before we read these verses 6 through 8, let me just explain that what those verses did. I mean, a guy had the gift, all right, that was given to him, but these verses 6 through 8, worked in conjunction with that gift so that the recipient of that gift was able to labor with God, and the Scripture actually guided that. And as I mentioned to you last time, the genius of God is He doesn't have to change that now that the more excellent way has come in and replaced those in part spiritual gifts, that we are going to be able to benefit from the same passage of Scripture has application for us today. And so, instead of gifts being given to us by the Spirit, and we are going to function out of an office that is of our own choosing. And that's what I want you to remember now as we move into verse 6. Having then gifts differing according to the grace that is given to us, whether prophecy, let us prophesy according to the proportion of faith, or ministry, let us wait on our ministering, or he that teacheth on teaching, or he that exhorteth on exhortation, he that giveth, let him do it with simplicity, he that ruleth with diligence, he that showeth mercy with cheerfulness. Now, as you know, unlike the Roman saints, at the time Paul wrote this, we didn't get a supernatural gift that was given by the Spirit. We're going to get an office, and that office is going to come out of our understanding of the completed revelation of Scripture. And so instead of that just being given to us, we're going to make a wise, informed, intelligent sonship decision. And this is a sonship decision of which office I'm going to function out of. In order to do that, we need to understand some things about those offices. Because it's out of that office that you're now going to labor with your Heavenly Father. And so as we turn our attention to these verses, there's something very important I need us to make sure that we realize. What we're about to do is the very first step toward what will ultimately fulfill God's plan and purpose when He created the heaven and the earth to begin with. In other words, way back there when He had something in mind He wanted to do, and He created the creature, and He created the earth in the midst of the creature, there was something He wanted to do. Well, we know that the creature was made subject to vanity, and it's under the bondage of corruption, so is the earth. But what we're doing now is actually what's going to equip us now to be able to restore all of that and to get that done. And that means that plan and purpose not only meant there was a heaven and an earth, but His wisdom and His righteousness needed to be at work in it. And so we're going to restore that alone. God chose not to do this alone, but He chose us to do it with Him. What a grand privilege that is. And we're going to get to put His wisdom to work in the heavenly places to fulfill that grand design that He had in the first place. And so that's what this is doing. This is how big this is. And I just wanted to call that up to our attention because this is what's training us to sit in those rulership positions in the heavenly places. So the most powerful of God's operations are going to be at work in this local assembly. And we're going to train in them right here. And this is going to be our first opportunity to do this is the first step in getting all of that accomplished. And this is exactly what a local assembly was designed by your Father to do. I know this would sound very strange to most churchgoers, but this is a classroom. That's the first thing it is. And the second thing it is a laboratory where we take those things that were in the classroom and we begin to put them to work. In the same way, we're going to put them to work up there. And so this is where training takes place for what's going to happen in eternity. Now, just so we don't lose sight of what these offices are meant to do, these are not, all 7 of these are not offices just for office's sake. These offices are what make a local assembly. Now, don't get me wrong. Are there some other offices that we will discover as we advance through the curriculum? Yes, there are some things that we'll see. But these are the ones that have to be in place in order for us to be. And it doesn't matter how small a group is. It doesn't matter if it's just a half a dozen people or if it's 60 people. I have ideas about how big this can go and actually function the way it's supposed to. But it doesn't matter. These are the offices that have to be filled. And so when we look at these things, when we look at these their gifts and their offices, when we look at those, we have to remember that behind all of those, there is an operation that God, well, there are actually several operations that God is wanting to continue to accomplish throughout the dispensation of grace. Why am I telling you that? Because as you choose an office, you're going to do it knowing which operation you are actually laboring with your Father in. That is the critical difference between the living and the labor. The labor is accomplishing an operation, a specific operation. The living is something that just gets done generally all the time. I'm saying that and I'm thinking, I need to say one more thing about that because I'm not sure that registered, the difference between the living and the labor. I gave you the example ago. I start coughing. Somebody brings up a cough drop. Somebody brings up a glass of water. That's the living. When you understand what operation your Father is accomplishing in this assembly, and then you put those body attributes into action toward that operation, that's godly labor. I'm just trying to make sure that we see there's not a whole lot of difference between that, except one of them is a little more focused, a little more directed, and that's the labor.
We're showing mercy, because until you get stopped coughing, we can't learn.
Until you're showing mercy, because until I stop coughing,
we can't learn.
You can't learn. Okay. So, and so that was for the benefit of the whole assembly, right? Okay. All right. Every assembly has a certain number of offices to it, and we're looking at this list here. And as it grows, more of those offices are going to emerge. And those offices, by the way, are not all of them are static. Some of them are dynamic or fluid. They change. And you'll see that some are kind of temporary in nature, and then the assembly will get to a place where those aren't needed anymore, but those offices will kind of merge into something else and become something that the assembly needs at that particular time. And the reason for that, by the way, is because that's the way the creature is. There's going to be situations that you're going to find yourself in the creature in which the thing is all going to change. And if you're just kind of stuck with only one way to do it, okay, now look, I'm setting you up here because now here's the statement I needed to make with all of that. I'm not going to tell you how all that's going to change. That is going to be up to you to decide for yourself. That's a requirement for us to be able to do when we get into the creature, is to look at a situation and understand how things have changed and understand how to change what we're doing in order to deal with that. You have to get used to being able to make those kinds of decisions. Right at the start, will you always make those decisions right? No, you won't. But do you know what? It's the doing of it that allows you to one day get enough experience under your belt that you go, and you know what the temptation is going to be when someone behind you that's later to the assembly and doesn't know what this group knows, and they'll come along and they'll want to do something. The temptation will be to go, oh, don't do that, and just tell them about it. But you understand the danger of just telling them about it is they don't have the experience of knowing how to do it. I remember a guy, another preacher that I knew up in Denton, Texas, told me one time, he's talking about staff members and the liberty that he gave his staff members. And he said, you know, if I don't give those guys enough liberty to hurt me, I haven't given them enough liberty to help me either. They've got to be able to do this on their own. That's a similar type thing that we're talking about here. Okay, so I just wanted to say that you need to understand that what's coming along is you being able to make a decision about your office based on what you perceive. Now that sounds hard, but it's going to get there. You'll see. Karen?
We had a discussion on the internet over this the other night, and a lot of us are in the medical field or have played around in the medical field from childhood on up. It's like triage. You walk in and you assess the situation and you make choices to who deserves the attention quickest. And eventually everything gets taken care of. But your priorities come, you know.
Okay.
You make mistakes.
You do, yeah. Okay, and you know, and you're right. And that can change depending on what comes in the door.
Right.
That immediately now things are bumped and rearranged because of that. And that, you know, the folks on the DVD now are scratching their heads going, what are y'all talking about? And we're giving an illustration. It was an illustration in the medical field about how you determine who's going to need help first based on their condition. And that can change at any moment depending on who else comes in the door. You're going to have to be able to make those decisions. You will. The education will equip you to do that, but you'll need to get on the bike and feel that and fall down a couple of times before you'll really get the experience to get it right, but you will. Okay, and so that should make perfect sense, by the way, because this is a microcosm of the creature, and what's going to happen up there is going to happen here. So don't think that something's going wrong when all of a sudden something steers out of the lines. You know that the offices are just going to move to adapt to that. All right, so what is true of our physical body is just as true for this assembly when it's properly functioning. And what's true of this assembly is what's true of the creature. And all of that is connected. All right, I'm just trying to illustrate that up. By the way, not only are you going to get educated to choose an office, but you're going to get educated to not choose an office. In other words, you'll not only know which one of these I want, you'll also know which ones of these you don't want. And I'm going to tell you something else. You have the ability to function in more than one office. And some of you will. And as we get into these offices, then you'll be able to see that. But you'll make that decision. In fact, remember, didn't I mention this? I think I did, that you may look at one of these offices and say, I think there are some others that are much better suited to these offices, but I can assist them in these offices. Look, when I pick up this marker, this hand picks up this marker, this hand doesn't do anything. It's just letting this do it for itself. But there could be something else under here that if I started to pick it up with just one hand, it's either going to be too unwieldy or it's going to be too heavy, and I'm not going to be... And so what's going to happen? My other hand is automatically... See, I don't even have... Does my right hand ever start and go, hey, what are you waiting on over there? Get with it. Now, that's in the body. You know what happens? My left hand, you know what? My left hand, in fact, it knows already, doesn't it? Or if you think you can pick something up with one hand, have you ever been carrying grocery bags and ice in the other hand, and this thing is slowly slipping out of your fingers? And you know what happens? Other parts of your body help out. You pull that in, your knee comes up, and you kind of get another grab on it. You ever done that? But see, that whole body is going, yeah, I see what's going on. Now, there's a word that's sitting in this passage that's actually describing what I just talked about happens in the body. That's got to start happening in this assembly. That we're looking at things and doing those kinds of things. And like I said, a lot of that's already going on, but now we're going to tweak our perspective in that. In other words, we did it before because we were helping out. And that's not a bad thing. But now he's going to take our thinking a little further on that, so that you actually now see it from the standpoint of functioning in an office. And that's going to change a little bit the way that we think about that. And there's some other things that we'll look at in there too. Now, okay, so I just want to say that all those things that we learned back up here about sober thinking and the godly love that we have for each other and these 4 body attributes, now we're carrying all of that with us as we come into these offices and you begin to see what these offices are and we make decisions about what we're going to do. What have I got left here? Okay. So, chapter 12, verses 6 through 8, these verses that we read here, these are the verses that allow this to be more than just a classroom. They're the verses that are going to allow us to accomplish real godly labor. And I'm saying that again because of this. It has come to my attention, I really don't remember who this was. I talked to too many people during the week. But someone called up and said, I just want to make sure that I understand. I had said something way back in orientation about when we get our glorified bodies and we labor in the creature. And they got the impression from that we really can't labor with God until we get the glorified body. That's not right. And so if I said it in a way, and I think what was happening is, I was talking about this is training for that ultimate position when, you know, I kind of called this the practice field for the big game up in the creature. But this is real. You know, this is not us just pretending to labor. We really are laboring. There are operations He wants to get accomplished, and we're going to get involved in getting those operations done. So it's real labor. And so that's why I'm pointing that out, because I wanted to clarify in case there was someone else that was wondering about that. Did anybody here have a problem understanding that? Okay, just wanted to make sure. All right, now you'll notice in the passage, here's what we have. We have 7, in the case of the Romans, gifts. In the case of us, these are offices, 7 different ones that are in the list. And as always, in every list, what do you know is true? They're in an order. There's an order to the things in the list. And as a matter of fact, they're not only in an order, but you can actually break this down. There are groups of gifts. And I'm going to make it easy for you and tell you, these 7 gifts are divided into 2 groups. Can you look at that passage and tell me which gifts you think are grouped together? There's 2 different groupings of them. And what you have to do is you have to pay attention to the terminology and the way that that's written up there. So while you're doing that, I'm just going to write them up here. Prophecy, minister, Teach, exhort, give. Is it mercy's last, right? Okay. Rule and mercy. Okay. Anybody want to venture a guess at this? Are you? It's in the terminology of the passage. There's something that's setting one set of gifts off from another set.
Prophecy, ministry, teaching, and exhortation is the first.
Okay, so you're saying the line is here between prophecy, ministry, teaching, and exhorting. Well, it would be unfair of me to let you go any further because Bud nailed it. Now, how did you come to that, Bud?
Because all of them have to do with the teaching and the running of the body, where where you learn the word, you minister the word,
Okay.
you teach the word, and exhort.
Okay, now you know what Bud has done. Okay, some of you are nodding your heads. You were thinking the same thing. Did you see that? In the notes, I say there's a commonality here of these first four gifts. They do. And you know what Bud is doing? He's tying these in to a single operation that has to do with communicating the Word. And that's true. But now, there's something else. I wonder if did anybody see anything else here that allowed you to... let me just look at this here. There's those four. That's the first group. Did anybody see anything in the... I'm going to back you back up now. Did anybody see anything in the rest of those gifts or offices that the terminology tied them together in a group? That didn't become apparent? It will when I point it out. I think the commonality is the easier thing to see, and so if that's what you saw, that's fine. But I guess my second question would be, how do you know there's only one other group instead of two other groups? And that would be, look, and by the way, there's a reason for that it can't be three groups or four groups. Look at how these other last three gifts. Let him do it with simplicity. He that ruleth with diligence. He that showeth mercy with charity. Do you see that with? It's telling them how to do it. And so there's an additional instruction to those that says, when you do this, do it with this, or with this, or with this. And so that is the way that you know all of these three gifts now. So this is, we're just going to call this is group 1. This is group 2. And now what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to go through these so that we can understand what each one of these are talking about and how those are going to apply to a local assembly like us. By the way, does anybody know why there's two groups? You do know enough to answer this. You may not know you do. Linda?
Because in the operations, the administration, and the material go on.
All right. This one was to communicate the Word, right? Does anybody remember what that second operation was? The orderliness of the local church. Those are two things that continued on, two operations that went right on. Can you not just look at those? Now, Bud's already talked about how these first ones all do this kind of thing. Can't you see this group as providing order to the church? And I'm actually going to break that down just a little differently. Those operations are the way you know, because there's two operations, then there's two groups. There's a group to do this operation, and there's a group to do this other operation. But do you notice anything else that differentiates these before I start telling you what they are? Is there anything else that you can look at that and go, yeah, this group kind of, and then this other group kind of, I don't want to fill in the blank because I'm trying not to give it away. Can you see any other difference? Oh, okay, I got to just tell you, huh?
The last part's kind of like how you're living, and the first part is how you're not.
Okay. I can see that. Remember that no matter which of these offices you're in, you are going to be laboring with your Father in this. When you look at this, let me use the old terminology we would have used, in the old systematic theology days. Because this all concerns the Word, doesn't that kind of, we would say, those are things of a spiritual nature. These are things of a more material nature. Now, that's the way we might have said in the old days. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change this up, and I'm going to say, these are the things that work toward edification. These are the things that work toward material and organization. And by the way, every assembly has those two needs. There has to be some material way. Well, let's start with the first one. If edification is not taking place, then this isn't even functioning like an assembly is supposed to function. So those offices are necessary. If there isn't anything that actually gives structure and order and provides materially to the assembly, then it can't stay in business. It can't function. It'll either go under or it'll just fracture from lack of structure somehow. So every assembly has those needs. In fact, everything, your body has that need. And so does this assembly. I need to kind of finish this up because I really want to get us over to where we need to be, and I'm almost there. In a small assembly, now look, I know we haven't gone through these gifts, but in a small assembly, and I'm talking about not just the size, and we're about the size when everybody's healthy in here, we're about the size of most of the groups that are sonship churches. That's about what this is. But even if it's smaller than this, usually all of the things in group number 1 are done by a single individual. If you only got 8, 9, 10 people, one person is usually the one that's doing those things. It is not that way for us, and you'll see that as we go through the gifts. And then the other gifts or offices are taken up by the rest of the membership of the assembly. And by the way, it's supposed to be that way. If you turn that upside down, it would be pretty chaotic, and you'll see as we go through those. So, I guess I'll just reserve that for when we come back from the break, because when we come back, we're going to start with this one, and we're going to work our way through these offices so that we understand exactly what those are, because this is the choice that you're going to be making out of this. And it's not something whereby we're going to pin a badge on you and I am the official sheriff of this office, but you're going to make a decision, and you're going to look at them and you're going to think about them, and this is an area for some serious sonship prayer to ask your Father about these things, and we'll go through them. But this is going to be great. Now, by the way, you're fixing to really get what this is supposed to be. In the old days, whenever I had the old systematic theology going, I used to see these lists of gifts here in Romans and the ones over in Corinthians, and and it had all these books that were out, and everybody had a take on the gifts. Everybody, this is your gift, this is your gift. Then when you find out the gifts got replaced with the more excellent way, what we should have been saying is, here is your office. And that's going to be a little different. Okay, so we'll stop here. We'll take a